So why medicine? I'll be really honest, and
Hmm.
this sounds a bit glib, and I don't mean it to. I genuinely didn't know what I wanted to do.
So let's get real. Our value as doctors has significantly diminished over the last decade. So, how can we turn that around by upskilling and creating rewarding and impactful careers on our own terms? Welcome to Disrupting Doctors' Careers. I'm your host, Dr. Abeyna Bubbers-Jones, and I'm on a mission to connect 1 million talented doctors with the best in diverse career opportunities. Welcome to today's episode of Disrupting Doctors' Careers. I'm your host, Dr. Abeyna Bubbers-Jones, and we have a really exciting guest. Well, every guest is exciting. I mean, I don't invite non-exciting guests to this podcast, but today, I'm always excited. We have a great guest because he is one of the founding fellows of our Doctors in Industry Fellowship. So he started our program last year, and he has made tremendous progress and strides in his personal career development to industry, which he's going to share a lot of insights into that journey, so you can use that for your own journey moving to industry. Regardless, you might even already be industry, and a lot of the gold in what he's got to share is here. So I'm really, really warmly introducing Mr. Lee Humphreys, who is I'm only hesitating because it was basically when he was younger. I'll let him share that story. Well, anyway, Mr. Lee Humphreys, who is an obesity expert, a bariatric surgeon, and specializes in working with pharma and health tech companies. He also is, I like to say, the Jack D of the art world, of the photography world, and everything else around it. He has got the driest, funniest humor that I've ever seen in a bariatric surgeon. I love it. But welcome, Lee.
Well, thank you, Abeyna. I'm not sure I can live up to that intro. But yeah, no, it's great to join you as a guest on the podcast, having first come across you via listening to this podcast when I was
Hey, oh my
starting
God.
out on my journey. So to a year and a bit later to have ended up as a guest. Hopefully this I won't be the last guest you ever have because I wreck your podcast, but let's see how it goes.
Oh, you're not going to wreck. You're just going to blow it up in a good way. In a good way. So I held back, which I don't know why I did, because when I first asked you, how did you want to be introduced? You shared a little story with me. So please do share that story.
See, you promised you wouldn't ask me this question.
I didn't promise anything.
So I jokingly said to you that I'd like to be introduced as an international playboy, which clearly from anybody that knows me is a complete and utter fantasy. But this does stem from years and years ago when I was asked by a careers advisor in school what I wanted to be when I grew up. And in my unfortunate way of not taking too many things in life too seriously, I jokingly said to her, I would like to be an international playboy, which then led to me being asked to leave the room, and no further sessions with the careers advisor were scheduled for me. So there we go. I have not ended up as an international playboy. I have drive and ambition. I just lack funding. That's the
I
reality.
always like to say, not yet.
Not
There
yet.
is
Maybe.
still
Maybe.
time. There is still time. And it's an international career. You get to travel, you get to play, you get to be a boy. All
Yeah, yeah,
fun.
yeah. My
All
wife
fun.
may have something to say on that issue, but she's not here, so let's carry on quickly.
Oh my gosh. Well, anyway, welcome to this podcast. And I'm excited to pick your brains on your journey thus far. But let's start with, I mean, from international playboy to bariatric surgeon, how did that happen, firstly?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I never actually got to the international playboy bit, so let's be clear on that. Yeah, so like most people, yeah, went to medical school. Interestingly,
Well, then why did you go to medical school? I'm really curious as to what your decision-making process was,
yeah,
even though
well,
you were a child. Like, yeah, why medicine and why obesity and bariatrics?
so why medicine? I'll be really honest, and
Hmm.
this sounds a bit glib, and I don't mean it to. I genuinely didn't know what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
I knew I didn't want to work in an office. My dad ran his own business. He had a builders merchants company and skip hire, and I'd sort of been around that most of my youth. And my dad made it very clear that he did not want me to go into that business. And I was literally just looking around and thought, well, medicine looks interesting. And I was, reasonably capable, or thought to be at that point in time. So that's I sort of went down the path of going to medical school. Um, Interestingly for me, having done reasonably well in my GCSEs without too much effort, didn't go so well for my A levels first time round. And when I say didn't go so well, let's be honest, it went pretty badly wrong. So I got pretty poor grades first time round, and my offer for medical school, needless to say, I didn't make my offer for medical school, which was disappointing for me and for my parents. And it was a bit of a shock to me, actually, to be honest. And it, in retrospect, was the kick up the backside that I probably needed at that point in my life. So I had to go away and redo my A levels whilst all my friends went off to university. Uh, had quite a tough year doing that, and then fortunately got accepted into medical school the following year, having improved my academic achievements that year. And that was me. Yeah, and that was me in medical school.
Brilliant. And I think that story is quite familiar one. I know lots of people who didn't get into medicine the first time who are now thriving doctors. I literally did not get into any medical school until the last minute where Nottingham University said, "Hey, we've rejected too many people. Do you want to come and join us?" And that's how my medical career started. And I had no problems, passing exams. I've passed all my exams since then. But yeah, it literally could have made, I could be living a different life. And I think a lot of people have been through that experience. So, and here you are, healthcare has really benefited from Lee Humphreys,
Wow.
who, I always think we're too young to make those decisions as to what we want at that stage. But at the same time, it's more about how do we leverage what we're doing now. So fast forward to you've made it to bariatrics.
Yeah.
Why look to develop your career further in industry?
So obesity has been my sort of specialist interest and my passion for over a decade now. And I think it's a fascinating disease state that isn't really recognized as a disease in the UK, despite being recognized in many other countries. It underpins a huge amount of both chronic and acute health conditions that we're spending vast quantities of money treating on the NHS, yet we're not making a plan for how we're going to deal with it in the longer term that's going to work. And whilst working in the NHS and treating patients on an individual basis is incredibly rewarding, and bariatric surgery, when it goes well, which it does for most people, is genuinely life-changing and life-changing very quickly, and that's great to see. I'd like to make an impact on a wider scale, and I know that's a bit cliche because I think a lot of people who want to go into industry will say, I'd like to make an impact on a wider scale. But I think for me, what triggered it as well was the advent of the GLP-1 medications that everyone's been talking about, both in a positive and a negative way. But one of the positives is that they've really opened up the conversation about obesity again. And it's a great new treatment option for patients if they're delivered by people who are experienced and understand obesity and done in a responsible way. And so I think, looking at it from my perspective as a surgeon, I think they're a great thing, but I think there's a lot of they haven't been necessarily been implemented in the right way in a lot of circumstances. And I think that someone with my experience and my background can add to how they can be delivered responsibly and well in a different environment.
I think absolutely, and I mean we talk a lot on the program about amplifying your voice and the importance of that. Tell me more about how, so for example, if you didn't go to industry, like, do
Yeah.
you feel like you would have the same impact that you would do, say, like in the NHS in your role?
No, I think the NHS is, as everyone knows, under huge amounts of pressure, and there are lots of different decisions to make. But to be able to influence the NHS at a significant level involves sort of climbing that management ladder or getting yourself onto an advisory committee and that sort of thing. And that's not something I'd ever really done in my career. My clinical career, I've sort of regard myself as a jobbing surgeon. I'm one of those people who just tries to keep their head down, get on with the work, try and do the best I can for my patients individually and at a local healthcare system level. But I've never really been one who sort of jumped up and down and put myself forward for national committees and things like that. And it would, in order to have that wider influence in the NHS, that's a route that I would probably have to go down. And for various reasons to date, that's not one that's been attractive to me.
Okay. And you were talking about wider influence in the NHS. How about wider influence in healthcare and beyond? Why do you think it's important for you, or even doctors in general, to consider taking that leap, and what the impact is or the difference is in doing it that way?
The world is changing
Mm-hmm.
rapidly. How people, patients consume information and where people now look to get their healthcare from is changing incredibly quickly. And, a lot of NHS consultants, particularly more senior consultants, are probably unaware, the majority of them, that all this is going on around them. And I'll be honest, until I sort of started to dip my toe into this area and look outside the NHS, I was aware that bariatric patients, for example, get a lot of their information from social media. And on the whole, it's a bit of a double-edged sword in my view. There is some very good content out there, but there's also some frankly dangerous content out there. And as a patient or a lay person, it can be incredibly difficult to distinguish between what's good quality advice and what's dangerous. And unfortunately, people tend to consume on social media from people who are popular, who have the most followers, who are the easiest to find. But
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily equate to people who are giving you good quality advice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that's an excellent point to make, and for doctors to realize that the most successful people that we see are they're just the best marketers. It doesn't mean that they are the best at what they do. They might be, but they might not be as well. And this is why we're seeing a lot more people say, like I always, Karen Rajan, who was also a surgeon. He's a
Yeah, yeah.
registrar level in the NHS full time. Don't know how he's doing it. Um, I know because he's at home with the dog when he's not at work, and obviously social media. 2 million followers, tackling health misinformation. He's grown an international brand, apparently one of the most followed doctors in the world. And he's all doing that, but outside of the NHS, but still being employed as a surgeon in the NHS, which again is incredible because I mean I've talked about this with Karen about how you're living a double life in many ways, but what he's doing is tackling it in a way where he will be more effective than necessarily doing it directly under an NHS umbrella, because as you say, you can be limited in your voice, you can be limited in the way that you do things. Even though a lot of people do value the NHS and value the information, they want people, not brands, right?
Yeah, I think you make a great point there, and I think he's doing some fantastic work. I think the NHS as a brand is a very trusted brand, and I think you know I'm sure different people will have different experiences, but I can say from personally working as a sort of frontline consultant at the moment, the majority of my day is taken up with admin, firefighting, problem solving, and I just don't have the headspace or the support within the working environment to do something like this, to go to most NHS trusts and say, well, look, actually, let's get out on social media. Let's do some high quality stuff to break down or fight some of this disinformation. I mean, the trusts just don't have the capacity, the headspace, the money, or the time to think about that. So I think to do it well and to do it and get your voice across huge numbers of people like he has, you have to step outside and do that.
Mm-hmm.
There is a danger, of course, that you need to do it well and you need to be credible. And he is doing it well and he's very credible. But there are, I think, particularly in the obesity space, if you go on social media now, how many people there are obesity experts? Thousands, thousands and thousands of them. How many of them have actually done formal training? How many of them have actually got a background in working with obese patients within a regulated environment like the NHS previously? A small fraction of those who are obesity experts on
Mm-hmm.
social media. And that's very difficult. And as you rightly say, the ones who have got the biggest following will often be the best marketers of
Yeah.
themselves. And that doesn't
Yes.
necessarily mean that they are actual experts, but people listen to them because
Yeah.
they have the numbers behind following them.
Absolutely. And, they do it because they are being authentic or whatever their authentic brand, personal brand is, but people can relate to them. So this is the currency these days, and the world is changing as you described. So when I first started kind of not leaving, but because I haven't really left, I'm still a clinician, but not necessarily in the NHS. But when I started exploring industry as a whole, I realized that people didn't really give a crap about my qualifications. They didn't really know about whether, what qualification was in medicine or what the different letters were in the alphabet after my name. They just wanted to know that I could help them, right? That was the most important thing for them. And I think that's really important to remember, like when you are developing your personal brand outside of the NHS, is that, the things that are valued and recognized in the NHS that you built your career on thus far isn't necessarily the things that are going to help you to grow your reach and your recognition in industry. And more it is basically whether people relate to you and whether they like you and how consistently out there you are. So you can't expect to like post something or run a video and then like disappear for a few months and expect to get a load of
Yeah.
engagement unless it goes viral, which you should never rely on going viral because that's a bit random. It is about people that are out there time and time again, because consistency equals reliability equals credibility. That's how it works. So if you're a doctor listening to this and you're considering, say, going on YouTube or any of these platforms, it's so important to really commit to this long term. See this as a long-term project. That's where you're going to see the returns. Going back to Karan Rajan, he's posted on his social media saying, "Hey, I've been doing this for like 5 to 10 years before I actually saw an uptick, and then I found my formula, and then I'm just rinsing it on all these different platforms." It took him ages. He didn't like just start and then went viral, right? And so there's always a journey before that. But he's leveraged that experience, but also leveraged his knowledge and his experience in the NHS. So, as a doctor, you are always going to be credible and valuable, but you've really got to leverage and amplify that using the tools, using the same approaches that people that don't have your expertise have been using. So it's great to hear that. But let's jump back to, in this journey to industry, pharma, health tech, like what was it that led you to say, right, I need some support in this journey. I'm going to consider joining the fellowship?
Yeah, so I had started probably about 6 months before I originally reached out to you. I had started to explore what my options might be outside. And I have a couple of good friends who I was in medical school with who have subsequently left the NHS, one sort of after about 4 years and one much more recently, and gone into pharma. And so I'd started by having conversations with them. And then I'd started sort of trying to figure out, how do I start this journey? And I read a few books and a few articles by people who had done it. And so I quite rapidly realized that I needed to do something very differently to what I'd been doing to get jobs my entire career. And I had never been on LinkedIn. Um, and I had obviously had a very traditional consultant type CV. And so after sort of 3 or 4, maybe 5 months of trying to reach out and do things, and my friends introduced me to various people within pharma companies, and I'd spoken to people with a view to sort of, let's get them to know you, something might come of it. And that approach was helpful because at least I started to network, but it didn't really return anything in terms of any job offers or any exploration. But it started to give me an idea of how very different this entire process is to what I've been used to,
Mm-hmm.
and make me realize that I needed a different skill set to the one that I had. My clinical skill set was great, and that might get you speaking to people, but that skill set is very narrow, and I needed to think about my transferable skills and all of those things that you talk about very regularly. So I then started to look around, and I found the Medic Footprints website, and there was some great content on there, and I looked at some of the videos and all that sort of stuff, and then I just started to think about it and thought, I can do this. I could probably do this on my own, but I am sort of reaching around in the dark a little bit, and hoping for the best. And I'm someone who is quite goal orientated, and I just thought, look, I've got a problem here. These guys have worked with people and helped solve this problem for other people. So actually, let's reach out, and that's how it started, really.
Brilliant. And well, I mean, that's a very common reason why people join our program and fellowship. And it is about, yes, you could do this on your own. It will likely take you longer. It will likely be harder. And actually, it's really lonely. It's a really lonely journey, right? And so having a community of like-minded, being the keyword, like-minded people, doctors around you to support you in that journey, to learn from. Like, I've made a ridiculous amount of mistakes, right? So you don't have to, right? It's about learning from other mistakes just to save yourself from the hassle, but you're still going to make those mistakes. Like, this is mentorship. This is not dictatorship, in the sense that I'm saying, I invite, this is what I experienced. You could learn from that, or you could do it yourself and see what happens. I don't know what's going to happen, in that sense, but just based on my experience, this is what I would suggest, and people can take it or they can leave it. And that's how life works, right? But it is about, I personally, being the person who's leading this program, I learned so much from the people on the program themselves. So for me, it's a great learning experience. And also a great, how do I say, I love learning more about what's happening dynamically in the landscape. And you hear that based on people's experiences or doctors' experiences in interviews and conversations at conferences. Obviously, as individuals, we can't be at all of these events and all of these interviews and speaking to all of these companies. But as a group, as a hive mind, we benefit from all of those insights where we're all going out into the world and getting that live data. So, I mean, I'd love to hear your experience from benefiting from other people's experience in the group. Like, how has that been valuable to you? How have you taken that insights into practice? And also, you've given us a lot of intel based on your own experience. So yeah, have you got any comments on that?
Yeah, I think you're right. It was an incredibly lonely place trying to do it on my own, and yeah, I think the Medic Footprints, the Doctors in Industry Fellowship Program, was a real eye opener for me. I'm not going to lie, I was quite skeptical at first because I'm a natural skeptic,
We all
and so
are, really.
I didn't know what I was
We were
getting.
also skeptical about you, Lee.
Understandably, you and lots of other people. And rightly so. But yeah, I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. But I think the community and the support was incredibly valuable. And having the mentorship of, look, this is where we need to start. And as you will vividly remember, LinkedIn was just something that
Mm.
I just could not. I just didn't want to and couldn't get myself going on. And I very clearly recall the first sort of few weeks of the program where I was doing my PDP and you were helping me develop my LinkedIn profile and we were firing things back and forth. And I looked back at it a couple of weeks ago to see where I started, and I'm almost embarrassed about some of the stuff that I put forward to you at the beginning. But it was incredible because within I think about 10 days, it had gone from what I tried to start out with, let's be honest, was a steaming pile of manure to, to something that you really, really helped me craft to something that actually looked credible, made sense, allowed me to try and express what I was all about and where my skill set may lie. And I wouldn't have done that in that short period of time without the feedback and the help. And yeah, and being able to reach out to people and say, look, I've got this interview coming up. I've never done this before. What do you think of this? That, yeah, for me, that support network was incredibly valuable. And I really, and that's one of the reasons why, having now done the fellowship, being a founding fellow, I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to give something back by mentoring, some new people on the program. And I wouldn't do that if I hadn't found it valuable and didn't believe in what you're doing. So
Great. I mean, I really value your feedback and insights. And at the end of the day, when people start on this journey, you do the best with what you know, right? And if you're not used to overcoming that social media blocker, I've been talking about it so many times in the last few days with individual doctors who have spoken to through mentorship. And it is a huge blocker because at the end of the day, I mean, I personally don't want to be on social media. I know it sounds surprising because I am everywhere, but I don't particularly enjoy it in the sense that it's a thing where it's quite gamified. You have to work to the algorithms. You've got to put yourself out there. But then, especially people like, I can't do what that person is doing. It's scary. But at the end of the day, we also had to overcome these same internal objection dialogues. But when you think about the bigger picture, and we do this in the masterclass, it's like, see these platforms, see LinkedIn, whatever you decide to use, as a tool and a means to get what you want. So even if you're looking for a job, even if you're promoting yourself as a brand, even if you're part of your company that you want to promote that brand, it enables you to scale you. And there's not many of any other ways to really do that effectively beyond going on TV. But again, like going on TV, it's quite fickle. If you manage to get like a media slot, like you come and you go, and then people forget about you quickly. But if people see you again and again and again, especially in your network, people remember you, people refer you. I've seen many, many doctors who have made just the smallest tweaks, like yourself, on their LinkedIn profiles, and then they get approached for jobs. And you know what we say is like most jobs don't get advertised. So the ones you see, they're advertised. That's like a tiny, tiny slice of what's actually out there. And so when you're thinking about, I don't want to go on social media, like think about actually the bigger reason for it and see social media as a tool. Like I see it as like a laryngoscope or a scalpel or a flexi sig, it serves a means to get to the diagnosis or to get to the thing that you're trying to get to. And I find it easier to think of it that way than it is to actually just sitting on social media. And like actually, because I remember you going, like making your first comment and then your first post, and then like all of a sudden I'm seeing Lee Humphreys everywhere, like commenting on Ozempic and
your worst
GLP-1s,
nightmare.
and yeah, and it's great because and this is over time as well. And actually, I wanted to talk about the time element of this program. So we see a lot of fellowships, especially the new ones coming out, that are like, you can get this done in like 2-3 weeks or maybe 3 months. But I mean, you've been doing this for over a year now. What is the benefit of time for you in this program?
Well, I think, the LinkedIn thing for me, it took me, I think the first time I actually put a post out that actually got any traction and I thought, oh, I can actually do this, was when I started posting about stuff that I really understand and that I'm really interested in. I completely got everything you were saying at the beginning about what we've just discussed about how it's a tool and all of that, but I still couldn't. I found it was a chore. I felt like, oh, I've got to do this once or twice a week. And I'd started sort of putting stuff out there just because I felt like I had to do it. And it felt like work and I didn't want to do it. And then I started making some comments about things that, in the obesity world that I understood, that I was passionate about. And then I just realized that wasn't a difficult thing to do. That took me like 5 minutes to write, and I enjoyed writing it. And then that started to get a little bit of traction. And then you sort of realize that actually, if you can keep doing stuff like that, and I still don't do it as often as I could do or probably should do. And I do tend to just comment on things that I'm passionate about or interested in. But it feels less of a chore than it did 6 or 7 months ago. And so it took me time to wrap my head around that. And it's taken me time. I mean, maybe it's an age thing, because as you know, it's been a long time since I turned 21. To get my head into this new world for me, and adapting to the completely different processes involved in applying for jobs, interviewing, building that different skill set, becoming comfortable talking about myself in a way that I was never comfortable about talking about myself. I've never been one who's been comfortable about selling myself, because you just don't do it on a regular basis. So the time element for me has been very valuable, because that stuff doesn't happen overnight.
Absolutely. And because when Ola and I started putting this program together, it was really about, do we do this in a short space of time? And, we're all in the quick fix area where you buy something on Amazon, you get it same night. But in reality, life just doesn't really work like that, especially when it's about, like, in order to succeed, whenever you're changing careers, again, as doctors, we think, oh, we'll just get another qualification and then we'll be enough, or I'll just sort out my CV and then I'll be enough, or even I'll just sort out my LinkedIn profile and then I'll be enough. That's part of the picture, but actually most of it, and most of the struggles that we see doctors face is themselves, is their own internal narratives. Like I noticed there, you talked about your age, right? We see doctors who are like medical student stage or like early foundation years, and they say, oh, I'm not good enough. I should have, I need to finish my training and then I'll be good enough to move to industry, for example. And then we see doctors at the other end, or even further, saying, oh, I'm too old. There's so many different narratives and objections that we tell ourselves that really hold ourselves back. And then you talked about the confidence piece, which is another massive thing. Again, I see this in pretty much every doctor that I've worked with, including myself, by the way. And I think a lot of these objections, they actually, some of them do stem from our experiences in public sector institutions, like the way of thinking that you can only be enough if you have this badge or this badge or this badge. But I always say, you have enough as you are. Your identity is not just being a doctor. You have to think outside of being a doctor to really understand your real value. And if there is anything where you feel like you're missing a big gap, most doctors kind of miss the commercial bit.
Yep.
Focus on the things that you already have, like the leadership skills, the analytics skills, the communication skills, all of those things, even the creativity. We had one of our fellows the other day who also is a musician. A lot of us actually are musicians, it turns out, and didn't recognize that being creative could also translate to being entrepreneurial or innovative, right? Because that also stands out. So yeah, I think you just hearing your insights is really valuable, because actually a lot of doctors share the same thing. I'm just mindful for time. I just wanted to jump on to getting into interviews, going through interviews, and how your approach has changed in the scope of the last year. So you've interviewed with a number of pharma companies and health tech companies. Again, focusing on the mindset bit, how has your mindset changed based on your experience going through those processes?
Yeah, so I mean, it's been an interesting, and it's been quite a steep learning curve, no doubt. And I think,
Hmm.
one of the first things that I needed to appreciate was every interaction's an interview. And
Mm.
I rather naively, the first interview I ever had with the sort of the first stage HR person, I naively wasn't really expecting a load of questions. I thought it was just going to be a nice chat about, my background and where we are. And after about 2 minutes, I very quickly realized I was in an interview. So, that was an important lesson. And I've realized that, there are various stages. They can be quite long gaps between them, particularly in big pharma companies. The process is slow, which is still something I find incredibly frustrating. I think the preparation is key, but not just sort of preparing the questions and all that. I think understand as much as you can about that company, the role, trying to reach out to people who work within the company, trying to find connections that you might have, or mutual connections with other people who can introduce you to understand a bit more about the company culture and all of those things before you maybe even get past the first interview stage. All of that requires a lot of legwork, but it's really important legwork. And also, I think of late, which is not something I've ever done before, I've come to appreciate that the interview process needs to be a two-way thing.
Hmm.
When I
Hmm.
first started this, it was, I really like the look of that job. I must get that job. And there may be a few things about that job that are ringing a little bit of alarm bells for me, but I can ignore those because I really must get this job. And actually, I've realized that that's not the case.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and, with some recent experiences, realize that, even if the job looks like it's something you can do and it's the right job on paper, if there are things that you are really uncomfortable about, then that job probably isn't for you. But that's a
Hmm.
completely new mindset for me. That's
Hmm.
not the traditional NHS job progression
Hmm.
mindset. So, yeah, that I think has been a really key learning point for me.
Yeah, I mean, again, it echoes a lot of doctors go into their interviews without this mindset of, why should I work for your company, not the other way around?
Yeah,
You know,
because
they
that's
need to
not
be
that's
selling the
not how
company to
medical
you.
interviews go.
Exactly, exactly. And like remember as a doctor, you have a huge amount of value that comes with a huge with a massive price, right? A massive price. Um, but you've got to be able to communicate that value, and you communicate that in so many different ways. And actually, most of the work is done before you even sit down in a formal interview,
Yeah,
right? And that's not just through your CV and LinkedIn, by the way, but that's part of the branding piece, and we talk about that a lot. But going back to the mindset, it's so important because it will change how you answer the questions, how you approach, how you even bring your authentic self into the room. And at the end of the day, it's a chemistry fit. Like we talk about, um, what another one of our fellows recently, had a baby, and within a few months had applied and got this pharma role, right? And very open about their situation. And, at the end of the day, you want to work with an organization that supports you being you and all of the needs around that, because if they don't, then you are going to struggle and it's going to be a nightmare for you, right?
yeah,
And if that organization isn't for you, then there's going to be thousands, if not more, that will be, right? So it's a really, again, mindset. And it does help you target, like, who is it that you're going to invest your time in to see whether it can work or not.
yeah. And I think it's really important. And as you know, I'm quite direct.
Yeah.
I will say what I think. Sometimes when I shouldn't, and that or I have worried that is this going to fit in industry? Do people want someone like that? And the honest answer is I've just now stopped worrying about it. As you rightly say, this is me. It isn't going to change. And I will say what I think. I will challenge when I don't think something's right. And people can do with that what they will. I think you have to do it in the right way.
Mhm.
But if you're not looking for someone who's prepared to challenge what you're doing, if you're just looking for someone who's going to say yes to everything, then I'm not for you. And you're probably not for me. But that's taken a while to get to that position.
Yeah, it takes time. It takes time and experience to build confidence, like we are as doctors, right? How many years do we train to become consultants? That
Yeah.
confidence doesn't come overnight. But anyway, I want to say thank you so much, Lee, for joining us on this podcast a year after the first time you listened to this podcast. So for anyone listening to this and you're thinking that sounds like it's for me, you could be the Lee in next year in 2025 with the same witty Jack D personality and absolutely killing it in your career, whatever you decide to do. So if you are looking to be on this podcast next year, go to medicfootprints.org/industry. And that is selling it.
I'm going to say thank you very much and finish with a very cheeky plug for my own podcast, which I've started as part of
Yeah, he's got a podcast as well. Can you believe? Look at
it.
this. Look at this.
Me and two medical
This is
students
what we do.
beyond the scale, starting the obesity conversation. So if you want some high quality obesity resources, check us out on YouTube and Spotify. Thank you very much, Abeyna. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. And if they want to reach out to you, what's the best way of doing that?
Yeah, just message me on LinkedIn. Very happy to speak to anybody.
Brilliant. So if you're listening to this and you're at the end of this episode, you have to be a subscriber. If not, subscribe. What are you waiting for? There's a lot more juicy insider insights content coming away, and a lot more of that is also on our Sunday newsletter. If you go to medicfootprints.org, join our mission. Anyway, thanks a lot for that, Lee, and we are so grateful that you are continuing on the program as a founding fellow and helping thousands of doctors after you.
My pleasure.
Yeah,
Thank you.
brilliant.